what we're talking about is you can't out supplement a shitty diet. Like, you're going to eat Chick-fil-A, but then you're going to stack all these supplements because you're trying to be healthy. You're missing it.
Can you walk us through the typical conventional path of the calf is born to being on your plate and what it's like to have regenerative?
Yeah, so on the conventional side, you'll have a typically in the West where the cow-calf, they call them cow-calf operations, where mama cow, baby cow. So the ranchers raise the mama cows, take care of them, and then they breed them every year, and then they have the baby. And then in the West, we don't have a whole lot of forage, not a whole lot of grass because we don't have a whole lot of rain, right? And so they can't really finish out, in other words, get them from calf to fat just on range ground in the West. Now, you can, but not the volume being moved through America, right? To feed America. You're not doing that in the West. And so they'll sell those at auction at a certain weight, 400 pounds to 600 pounds, kind of varies. And then those animals get bought at auction by a company or family, depends on who's buying them, that has a small feedlot or they're backgrounders. And then they'll take them as that 600 pound calf to their feedlot, and then they start feeding them rations. And those rations are very scientifically calculated to put a certain amount of weight every day on that animal, right? So they're getting a certain amount of feed because they know that this feed ration is going to give this cow a 2-pound gain per day. And those feed rations, a lot of them are corn and grain and other things to fatten them up. And so then they'll sit in that feedlot for however many days, depending on the operation, right? Some of the bigger operations, they're in the feedlots for 12 months, depending on what their finishing goals are.
Have you ever driven by any of these, Ted? Have you seen these?
No, I have not.
Oh yeah. If you drive, I know that I see a lot of them when I drive through like New Mexico, Arizona, or the Midwest as well. I see a lot of them. It's that place that is all dirt and smells terrible.
Yep. Yeah, if you're in Greeley, Colorado, they say that smells like money because that's where all the big slaughterhouses are. Now, I should be clear, 12 months may be a little long for how long they're there, but they're 120 days plus, depending on when they acquired that animal and what that particular operation is set up to do. I know I have friends that raise cattle and their cows are in feedlots their whole lives. Now they're smaller feedlots, and I would call it maybe like a boutique operation, if I could use that word in a rugged way. But those, it's like we have this very specific genetics. Maybe it's Wagyu, and so we're babying this thing, and it's in this stall. It can move around, and we're just giving it the exact feed ration because we're creating this very specific result for this quality of beef that's going to be sold at $100 an ounce at a restaurant, right? So you have that side of it too. Now, regenerative, the difference on the regenerative.
The one thing I understand too is when they get on the feedlot, say they're there for 6 months, so they show up at one weight, and we got to get them to this weight to maximize profit. That's when the steroids and antibiotics come in. Yeah, because they're fattening them up so quickly that they're going to get sick, and then that's where the antibiotics and steroids come in handy.
Yes,
and so that's why, from what I understand, that's why it's hard to get a cheap piece of meat that isn't full of steroids and antibiotics.
That's right. They put a lot of them have pellets they'll put behind their ears. It's testosterone, it's hormones, so that they gain weight faster because it's all about maximizing efficiency to revenue. I mean, they're trying to get the conventional system is trying to get a breed of cow that is finished in 14 months. That's to the efficiency conversation again. They keep trying to get faster at fattening these animals to plate because that's less time, less inputs, which means less money. And so how do we get to that point where you're eating veal at that point, right? And like Mike said at his family gathering, if you're fat, if the path to getting them to gain weight is to just put as much weight and fat on them as possible, which is corn and grain, it's like a human being that eats only carbs. They're metabolically unhealthy. And so that is what's happening. And a lot of times, there are rules and regulations about being able to sell meat with any traces of antibiotics, but I don't trust I don't trust the process and the people in charge to actually be telling the truth whether or not those are completely out of their system. I've read counter reports that say no, there are trace elements and they're causing hormonal disruption, especially for our young women, because of antibiotics or testosterone that's in, certain quantities within the meat they're consuming. So yeah, I'm glad you stopped us on that, because that's important. That's a big part of that. A lot of ranchers, depending on where they're selling, they've gone away from the hormones. They know consumers want no hormone or antibiotic beef. And so they've gone away from putting the pellets in. The challenge though is this is where I bring it back to the consumers, bucking the system that everybody's educated on. So unless the consumers become educated and show up for them, you leave them hanging and they either have to go back to what they were doing to sell into the commodity market or they go bust. Yep. So the regenerative side, like I mentioned a little bit, is focused on how the natural process of livestock in our environment and essentially how God intended them to interact for us and for the environment we're on. And so the regenerative side, to simplify it, it's basically managing your livestock as the wild bison herds did naturally, which means they were in solid, not confined, but solid tight bunches because of predators. So bears, wolves, coyotes, all the natural predators, kept them bunched together, just like you see in African safari videos when they're all moving and the predators are putting pressure from the outside. They all stayed together and they always were on the move because of the constant predator push. So regenerative is the livestock, the person providing the husbandry for the animal, looking at it from that perspective and saying, okay, we've gotten rid of the predators, and so they're not going to have any natural push. So I'm the predator. How would these animals behave if they had the predator push? I'm going to play that role. And the good news is that cow is way better off not being stressed by wolves tearing their rear ends out while they're standing there alive, because that's what happens. They've just got Farmer John dropping an electric fence and moving them to the next paddock. So what they'll do is they'll create paddocks or sections throughout their operation, usually with electric fence. Now there's new technology that my friends are using, which is basically like a shock collar for your dog, like a hidden fence. They now put those on cows. My buddy can take his phone, open up the app, and move his cows from his phone because it creates a sensation that moves them to the next section, no fencing required. And so now they're moving them in large herds. So what they're doing is they're blanketing the soil with their manure and trampling it in. The other thing that they'll avoid on many regenerative operations is deworming, ivermectin. Deworming is necessary when you're standing on a mountain of shit. But when you're out in the natural environment, it's less necessary. I'm not saying it's not necessary, but it's less necessary, and there are natural things you can do. But when you deworm a cow and it craps on the ground, that dewormer is in the manure. And what that does is it kills off the beneficial insects that nature has designed, like dung beetles, to drill that manure into the soil so it creates that soil biology. And the animals trampling on their own manure kind of starts pushing it in there. Their hooves are spayed like a little spade. And so when they step down, that creates a pocket for the organic matter and for rain to kind of sit and soak in when it's there. So they'll move them around in larger quantities so that it mimics that bison herd. They won't put ivermectin in many of these operations so that the beneficial insects can do their job, which is push it into the soil. The operations that have chickens will move chickens behind the cows after a day or two, because now the larvae from those beneficial insects have started growing. Chickens will go and scratch through the manure, eat the larva, but that scratching is them moving more of that organic matter into the soil. So that's kind of what that operation looks like. Some of those guys are still only finishing calves, right? They may not live in an area, or they may not have enough ground to take that animal all the way to finishing. But I've also met a lot of guys that didn't have enough grass to finish those animals that were regenerative in the beginning, but after 5 years, they're growing so much more forage because they've fed the soil that they can actually start finishing their livestock on the ground that they had because they've increased all that forage. And then it goes, from there it pretty much goes to the same pipeline. Somebody might background them. And backgrounding, I have a friend here, Cad's Beef, they buy the yearlings from somebody and they have pivots, which is what you grow hay on. And instead of just focusing on hay, they grow a diversity of forage. They put all those cows on those pivots and they rotate them close together on the pivots. And then they take them to their next, pivot and do the same thing. And then they finish them out completely on forage. They don't have enough ground to have cow-calf, right? That requires, depending on your size, could require tens of thousands of acres. They might just have a couple of 100 acres of forage to finish them on, but they can then do that.